It all started with a letter. A simple, white envelope, neatly addressed to me. At first glance, I thought it was just another piece of junk mail, maybe an advertisement or a bill. But when I opened it, my heart sank. It was a violation notice from the Homeowners Association, HOA. The letter accused me of having an unauthorized vehicle parked in my driveway. I read it twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of joke? I didn't have any unauthorized vehicles in my driveway. The only thing parked there was my helicopter. Yes, you heard that right. A helicopter. Before you jump to conclusions and assume I'm some rich, entitled guy showing off, let me explain. My name is Ethan Carter, and I work for the state governor. My job requires me to travel frequently between cities, often at a moment's notice. Driving isn't always an option, especially when time is of the essence. The governor himself approved my use of a state-owned helicopter for official business. It wasn't flashy, just a simple black chopper parked in my private driveway, away from the street. It was a practical solution, not a status symbol. But apparently, the HOA didn't see it that way. I crumpled the letter and tossed it on the table. The HOA rules were ridiculous, but I had never expected them to come after me. I paid my mortgage like everyone else, and I didn't think I needed their permission to park a state vehicle on my own property. But then, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to see Margaret Hayes, the HOA president. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Margaret. She was in her late 40s, with short blonde hair, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and an expensive-looking blouse that screamed, "I'm in charge." Her signature smug expression was enough to make anyone's blood boil. She wasn't just an HOA member. She was the queen bee of the neighborhood. "You got our letter," she said, arms crossed, her tone dripping with condescension. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "But I don't think it applies to me. This is state property. I work for the governor." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't care who you work for. This is my neighborhood, and I make the rules. No helicopters allowed." I could feel my patience slipping. "I pay my mortgage like everyone else. I don't need your permission to park a state vehicle on my own property." She smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "We'll see about that," she said, turning on her heels and walking away. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. I had a bad feeling, and unfortunately, I was right. The next morning, I stepped outside and froze. My helicopter was covered in bright orange stickers. "Violation. Remove immediately. HOA warning." My fists clenched as I ripped the stickers off, my anger boiling over. This was beyond ridiculous. I stormed over to Margaret's house, the crumpled stickers in my hand. She answered the door with that same smug grin. "Morning," she chirped, as if nothing was wrong. I held up the stickers. "You did this." She shrugged. "HOA protocol. If you refuse to follow the rules, we take action." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Margaret, this is illegal. You can't just—" "I can, and I will," she interrupted. "You have 1 week to remove that thing, or we will." Before I could respond, she slammed the door in my face. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone. It was time to make some calls. The next few days were tense. I kept an eye on my helicopter at all times, knowing Margaret wasn't bluffing. Then it happened. I woke up to a loud crash. I ran outside, and my stomach dropped. My helicopter was destroyed. The windshield was shattered, the tail was bent sideways, and the rotor blades were twisted beyond repair. In the middle of the wreckage was a massive tow truck, its mechanical arms still attached to the chopper. I turned to see Margaret standing there, arms folded, looking proud. "You did this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She smirked. "I warned you." The tow truck driver looked uncomfortable. "She said she had legal authority," he muttered. I didn't hear the rest. My world was spinning. My state-owned helicopter was destroyed, and Margaret had no idea what was about to happen. I didn't say a word to Margaret. I walked back inside, locked the door, and called the governor. He picked up on the second ring. "Sir," I said, trying to stay calm. "We have a situation." 30 minutes later, 4 black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood. The governor's security team stepped out first, followed by the governor himself. Margaret's smirk vanished. "Who's responsible for this?" The governor's deep voice boomed. Margaret swallowed hard. Sir, this man." The governor cut her off. "This man is my employee." That helicopter was state property, and you destroyed it. Margaret took a step back. I didn't know. Did you ask? The governor shot back. Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came out. The neighbors had gathered, some whispering, others recording the scene on their phones. The governor turned to me. Press charges. Margaret's face turned pale. But it's my neighborhood, she stammered. Not anymore, the governor said coldly. Margaret fainted on the spot. The police arrived within minutes. Margaret was questioned, and her power was stripped away. The HOA board turned against her instantly. It turned out Margaret had been misusing HOA funds for years. Once the investigation started, the truth spilled out. The governor's legal team handled everything. Margaret lost everything: her job, her money, her reputation. And the best part? My helicopter was replaced with an even bigger one. A week later, I stood in my driveway as my new helicopter landed. Margaret, now a nobody, watched from her window. I smiled. Justice had been served. Margaret thought she ruled the neighborhood. She thought she could do whatever she wanted. But in the end, she messed with the wrong guy, and she paid the price. For a while, things were peaceful. The HOA was under new leadership. My helicopter sat safely in my driveway, and Margaret had disappeared from sight. But something told me this wasn't over. And I was right. One evening, as I returned home, I noticed a figure standing by my driveway. It was Margaret. Her hair was a mess, her eyes sunken. She didn't look like the proud, arrogant woman who once ruled the neighborhood. She looked desperate. You ruined my life, she spat. I crossed my arms. You did that to yourself. You don't understand, she said, stepping closer. I had power. I controlled this neighborhood. I made the rules. And you destroyed everything. I sighed. You destroyed my helicopter first. Remember that. She clenched her fists. I didn't know it belonged to the governor. I smirked. That's the problem, Margaret. You never asked before you acted. Her face twisted with anger. I'll get my power back. You'll see. I shook my head. No, you won't. You're banned from the HOA. You lost your job. You're lucky you're not in jail. Her eyes darted to the helicopter. They gave you a bigger one, she muttered, almost to herself. I saw something in her expression that made my stomach tighten. Margaret wasn't done, and I had a bad feeling about what was coming next. That night, I barely slept. Something about Margaret's expression haunted me. And sure enough, the next morning, my worst fear came true. As I stepped outside, I smelled smoke. My heart pounded as I ran toward the driveway. My helicopter, my brand new, state-issued helicopter, was on fire. Flames curled around the tail, thick black smoke rising into the sky. Neighbors gathered, gasping in shock. Someone was already calling the fire department. And standing there, just a few feet away, was Margaret. She was holding a gas can. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. She did it. She actually did it. Before I could react, 2 police cars pulled up. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn. Drop the can, one of them shouted. Margaret didn't move. Her lips curled into a smile. Now nobody gets to have power, she said, laughing a wild, unstable laugh. Then she ran. But she didn't get far. An officer tackled her to the ground. The gas can spilled, but it was empty now. They wrestled her hands behind her back and slapped on the handcuffs. It was over. Margaret was arrested on the spot. This time, she wasn't just facing an HOA dispute. She was facing arson charges. And this time, she was going to jail. The fire department arrived quickly and put out the flames. My helicopter was damaged, but not beyond repair. I watched as Margaret was shoved into the back of the police car. Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with pure hatred. You think this is over? She hissed. I didn't respond. I just watched as the car pulled away, taking her out of my life. For good, I hoped. The neighborhood cheered. The new HOA president personally apologized, and even the governor called to make sure I was okay. Margaret's trial was fast. She had no money for a lawyer, and the evidence was overwhelming. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Justice was finally served. And me? I got a 3rd helicopter. Months passed, and the neighborhood finally felt normal again. No more Margaret. No more drama. But I should have known better. One evening, as I parked my car in the driveway, my phone buzzed with a notification. Unknown caller. I almost ignored it, almost. But something told me to pick up. I swiped the screen. Hello. A slow, familiar voice came through the speaker. Miss me? I froze. My grip on the phone tightened. It was Margaret. That was impossible. She was supposed to be in jail for 10 years. You sound surprised, she said, chuckling. Good behavior. Reduced sentence. I'm out. My stomach twisted. She shouldn't have been calling me. You have a restraining order, I said, keeping my voice steady. Oh, I know, she purred. But I just wanted to let you know. I haven't forgotten about you. The call disconnected. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. Margaret was back. And this time, I had no idea what she was planning. At first, nothing happened. Days passed, then weeks. No Margaret, no strange incidents. Maybe she was bluffing. Maybe she just wanted to scare me. But then, little things started happening. One morning, I walked outside and noticed a single bright orange HOA violation sticker on my helicopter, the same kind of sticker Margaret had used before. My blood ran cold. The new HOA president swore they hadn't issued any violations. That night, my security cameras glitched. The footage cut out for exactly 10 minutes, right around 2 a.m. The next morning, my trash cans were knocked over, their contents scattered across my yard. Coincidence? No. This was Margaret. I called the police, but without solid proof, there wasn't much they could do. Keep an eye out, the officer told me. If she violates the restraining order, call us immediately. I nodded, but deep down, I knew one thing. Margaret wasn't done with me yet. It happened on a rainy night. I was locking up when I heard a creak from outside. I turned toward my driveway, and there she was. Margaret stood under the streetlight, an umbrella shielding her from the rain. Her eyes gleamed with something unhinged. I didn't move. You're trespassing, I said, my voice steady. She smiled. I just came to talk. I reached for my phone. I'm calling the cops. Her smile didn't fade. You won't. I hesitated. She stepped closer. You think you won. That you destroyed me. No. You just delayed me. I clenched my jaw. What do you want, Margaret? She tilted her head. I want my power back. She reached into her coat pocket. My heart pounded. Was it a weapon? A document? A new scheme? I didn't wait to find out. I took a step back and dialed 911. Margaret smirked. Oh, now you call the cops. I didn't say a word. She pulled out a single piece of paper and tossed it at my feet. Then she turned and disappeared into the night. I picked up the paper, my hands shaking. It was a legal notice. Margaret was suing me for defamation. The lawsuit was ridiculous. Margaret claimed I had ruined her reputation and lied about her actions. Never mind the helicopter she destroyed or the arson she committed. But I wasn't worried. The governor's legal team took over immediately. Margaret had no chance. The court threw out her lawsuit within minutes. But Margaret refused to accept defeat. One night, I got another call. Enjoy your victory, she whispered. Because one day, when you least expect it, I'll be back. The call ended, and just like that, Margaret was gone. No more calls. No more threats. No more lawsuits. Did she move away? Did she give up? I don't know. But I do know one thing. Some people never change. And if Margaret ever comes back, I'll be ready. Months passed, and things finally started to feel normal again. No more late-night calls. No more sabotage. No more Margaret. But I never let my guard down. Margaret wasn't the type to disappear forever. And I was right. One evening, as I was finishing up some work in my home office, a notification popped up on my phone. Motion detected, driveway camera. I froze. I tapped the notification and opened the live feed. At first, I saw nothing, just the soft glow of my driveway lights and the quiet street beyond. But then I noticed it. A shadow. Someone stood just out of view, hiding behind the bushes near the edge of my property. My blood turned cold. Was it Margaret? I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my house. I think it's a trespasser. The operator took my address and promised to send a patrol car immediately. I stayed inside, watching the camera feed, heart pounding. Minutes passed. Then, suddenly, the shadow moved. A figure stepped into the light. It wasn't Margaret. It was a man I had never seen before. He wore a dark hoodie, his hands shoved into his pockets. But then he looked straight into the camera. A chill ran down my spine. He wasn't just some random trespasser. He knew I was watching. And then, slowly, he reached into his hoodie pocket. Just as the police car turned onto my street, the man bolted. The officers jumped out, yelling for him to stop, but he disappeared into the night. I stood there, staring at the screen, my hands shaking. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. Margaret wasn't working alone anymore. The police searched the area, but found nothing. The man was gone. I explained everything to the officers, the past incidents with Margaret, the threats, the lawsuit, the restraining order. They took my statement and promised to increase patrols in the area. But that didn't make me feel any safer. The next morning, I woke up to find another note taped to my front door. You took everything from me. Now it's my turn. No signature. No name. But I knew exactly who it was from. Margaret. And now, she wasn't just coming after me alone. She had help. I wasn't just dealing with an HOA nightmare anymore. I was in real danger. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for Margaret's next move. She had already destroyed my property, tried to burn down my helicopter, and sent people to intimidate me. Enough was enough. I took the note inside and examined it carefully. The handwriting was different from Margaret's old letters. Messier, rushed. Whoever wrote this wasn't Margaret, which meant she really did have someone else working with her. But who? And why? I called the police again and handed them the note. They promised to run a check for fingerprints, but I wasn't holding my breath. Margaret was smart, and if she had someone helping her, they were probably just as careful. Still, I wasn't going to just wait for another attack. I installed more security cameras, inside and outside my house. Motion sensors, smart locks, floodlights. I even hired a private investigator to dig into Margaret's activities since she got out of jail. And that's when I got my first lead. Margaret wasn't just living in the city. She was working at a small law firm downtown. A law firm. She was trying to rebuild her power. And worse, one of her co-workers had a criminal record. His name was Daniel Carter, 35 years old, 2 years in prison for fraud and harassment. Recently hired at the same firm where Margaret worked. And based on his background, he had a history of targeting people through intimidation. My stomach twisted. I had no doubt that this was the man who had stood outside my house that night. But why was Margaret paying him? Blackmailing him? Or had she somehow convinced him that I was the bad guy? I needed to find out. That's when I got a call. It was the private investigator. You're not going to believe this, he said, but Margaret's law firm is filing lawsuits against multiple people in your neighborhood. I gripped my phone tighter. What kind of lawsuits? Property disputes, harassment claims, even some HOA violations. And guess what? Every single case involves people who supported you against Margaret. My blood boiled. This wasn't just about revenge. Margaret was trying to legally destroy everyone who stood against her. She wasn't just coming for me. She was coming for the whole neighborhood. And I had to stop her. I met with the new HOA president and several neighbors who had been targeted. One of them, Mrs. Rodriguez, showed me the lawsuit Margaret's firm had filed against her. It was insane. They were accusing her of violating property codes on her own land. Another neighbor, Mr. Patel, was being sued for harassment because he had called the police on Margaret once. And the worst part? Some people were scared. They didn't have the money to fight these lawsuits. And that's exactly what Margaret wanted. She wanted to bankrupt them, to silence them, to take back control. But she had underestimated something, me. I had friends in high places. I made a few calls, to the governor's office, to a few high-profile lawyers I knew. And then I sued Margaret's law firm. Not just for harassment, not just for fraud, but for conspiracy. This wasn't just about some old HOA drama anymore. This was organized legal warfare. And Margaret was about to lose everything. The lawsuit hit Margaret's law firm hard. Within a week, 3 of their biggest clients dropped them. Within 2 weeks, Daniel Carter was fired and under investigation for threats against multiple residents. Within a month, Margaret herself was forced to resign. But I wasn't done. I wanted Margaret to understand what it felt like to be completely powerless. So I went one step further. I gathered every single neighbor she had targeted. Together, we filed a class action lawsuit against her. We had evidence, witnesses, years of her abuse. And this time, she had no way out. When the court date came, Margaret sat in the defendant's chair, looking small for the first time in her life. She wasn't the one in control. I stood up and looked her right in the eye. You wanted power, I said. And now you have none. She didn't respond. Because she knew it was true. The judge ruled in our favor. Margaret was ordered to pay damages to every single person she had targeted. She was barred from working in law ever again. And worst of all, she was banned from ever setting foot in our neighborhood. It was finally over. Margaret had lost, for good. The day after the trial, the neighborhood threw a celebration. People who had once been afraid were laughing again. The new HOA president stood up and made an announcement. "We are officially renaming our community park," he said. "From now on, it will be called Freedom Park. Because today, we are finally free from Margaret." The crowd cheered. And I just smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Margaret was gone. The neighborhood was safe. And my helicopter still sat right in my driveway, where it would always be. Because this was my home. And no HOA tyrant was ever going to take it from me again. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.